Okay, we'll get started. Other members to come. So, good afternoon. My name is Darryl McGraw. You are currently attending the Police Transparency and Accountability Task Force meeting. We'll start off with a roll call introduction or introductions. We'll start with Chief Wright. How are you, sir?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. William Wright, Chief of Police in Wallingford.
Good to see you. Mr. Foley, how are you, sir?
Good afternoon, everybody. Brian Foley, Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection.
Good to see you. Mr. Slifka, how are you, sir?
I am well, Mr. Chair. Nice to see you. Jonathan Slifka, representing the disability community and chair of the subcommittee on improving police interactions with the disability community. Thank you.
Awesome. Commissioner Ravella, how are you, sir?
Good, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon to everybody. Commissioner James Ravella, Emergency Services and Public Protection.
Good to see you. Renee, how are you?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Renee Lamarck Muir with Central Connecticut, staffing the task force.
Awesome. Mr. Clark, how's it going today?
Doing well, Mr. Chair. Andrew Clark from the IMRP at CCSU, and we're supporting the task force.
Awesome. I see my friend Henry. How are you today, Henry?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. It's Henry Mendoza with IMRP.
Awesome. Chief Mello, how's it going today?
It's going well, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Keith Mello, Chief of Police, City of Milford.
Awesome. Chief Drum, how are you today?
Very well. Good afternoon, everybody. Jack from Madison, Connecticut Police Department.
Awesome. Deputy Chief Silver.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and all. Maggie Silver, Yukon PD Deputy Chief.
Mr. Sezcek, how are you today, sir?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. John Shevchik, a retired Hartford Police Department and the former president of the Hartford Police Union.
And I see Mackenzie. How are you, Mackenzie?
Afternoon, Mackenzie Ozick with the IMRP at CCSU.
And we have a couple other people that I'm not familiar with, but you don't have to introduce yourself if you choose not. Brett?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Brett Salafia, Division of Criminal Justice, sitting in for Chief State's Attorney Colangelo.
Tell that guy I'm looking for him, man. Maureen?
Good afternoon, all. I'm an interested public person.
Welcome. And Mr. Camacho?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. George Camacho with the Justice Collaboratory at Yale Law School, just listening in at the invitation of Ken Baron. Thank you.
Oh, welcome, welcome. And we want to thank our friends from CTN for providing us with the recording for us. And we'll move to the next agenda item, which will be the minutes. Has everyone had an opportunity to review the minutes? Are there any corrections?
One correction, Mr. Chair, just to note for the record, Brett Salafia from DCJ was in attendance representing Chief State's Attorney Richard Colangelo at the last meeting and should be added to the members present.
Okay, we'll make that. Any other corrections? Is there a motion to approve the minutes, accept the minutes?
I'll make that motion as amended by Mr. Barone.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
At this time, the minutes will be accepted. Ken, could you bring up the agenda, please, first?
Andrew, if you could bring it up.
Yes, the next agenda item is old business, number 3. Ken slipped that in, I'm not sure.
I don't believe we have any old business unless there's other old business that members have. If not, Mr. Chair, we can move on to subcommittee updates.
And we're starting with the improving police interactions with the disability community.
Okay, we'll start there. Hello, Mr. Slifka. So, Chair Slifka.
Hello. I'm well, Chair McGraw. Nice to see you, sir.
You as well.
We had a meeting just just ended about a half an hour ago. We had a fantastic presentation by the head of the dispatch with Madison Police. It was coordinated by Chief Drum, very educational. We had further discussions on the police, the reports with respect to, I apologize, I'm losing my train of thought here. The reports with respect to social workers, and that work is continuing. Those reports are still being reviewed. And we also began a discussion on the idea and concept of a voluntary registry, and that discussion is going to continue as well. And we've set the dates for our next two meetings in July and August as well. And I know we need to wrap up our work soon so that we can provide recommendations to the overall full task force. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You're on mute, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Slifka, if you permit me to add something from that?
Absolutely.
Sure, just a public safety announcement, or public service announcement. It corresponds. I thought it was really helpful. You mentioned it was potentially life-changing. The other meeting wasn't on CTN, but just because this one is, I think it's important that we found out through dispatch that through your phones, and in particular certain providers, if you go to settings and you go to health, you can put in information about yourself that would be sent along in any 911 call. And also can be put in your phone in the event that you're unresponsive. Someone can find out that information without having to unlock it. So we just thought that was very helpful. We were looking at it from the perspective of the disability community, but I think most of us remarked that we didn't know about that. So I just wanted to bring that to light.
I'd also, if I could, Mr. Chair, just add to that one of the other things that we learned today with respect to scripting and the kinds of questions that dispatchers are allowed to ask, that they are considered a part of a medical team, a medical model, if you will, that does not preclude them from asking anything. So anything that they ask would not be in violation of HIPAA in any way. So they can ask any and all appropriate and probing questions to determine if someone they're on a call with may have a disability that would certainly be relevant to the situation at hand, so that officers can arrive on the scene and be as educated as possible. So that was very that was something I don't think we knew before, and definitely something worth noting for our attention. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Slifka. I found both of those things very interesting. One, how often is that being used, and are officers being provided that information when they're going to a scene? Considering a lot of things that we've seen across the country, it seemed that, if officers were more informed when arriving on the scene, maybe situations, I don't know, but maybe the situations would have ended differently, So I think that that's interesting. And the other thing that Mr. Clark pointed out with the cell phones, one thought is there a way that we could disseminate that information to the larger audiences so people know? But then I think back to my own household where I show my 16-year-old daughter something new on the phone that I think is really cool, and she knew it like 10 years ago. She was like, yeah, that's old. So I don't know what I think is new, but I wonder how many other people know that you can do that with your cell phone. So that might be something that we could look at, as we move forward, as we're coming to a close. And I'd like us to really, be able to say that we put some stuff on the table and put some stuff out there, educate communities. While I was on mute, I was welcoming you, Shafiq. How are you today, sir?
Good, and I'm on mute. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. It's been busy. We're getting a lot done, though.
Awesome. Good to see you. We're going to move to the next agenda item, which is the public awareness. And we will talk, Mr. Clark, you can help out with that public awareness subcommittee. You want to bring us up to our last meeting where we had, I believe, Dr. I forget how to say her name. So
Ringen. Yeah, Dr. Crenchen was, the first item was a presentation of the February and March youth listening sessions report done by our own Mackenzie Ozick. And that major themes report can now be found on the website. We'll be updating that. It has a draft watermark, but we'll be putting the, taking that out and putting that as a PDF. And based on that report and the information that we gleaned from those listening sessions, we are now in conversations about moving from those sessions to dialogues, and we're in the process of planning potential dialogues on two particular issues. One is youth and youth interaction with SRO. And so the school resource officers, we found that there was a variety of perspectives from the youth on how they viewed the presence of SRO in the system. And so we thought it was worth and worthy of digging into a little bit deeper before making any potential recommendations on that. And then Dr. Crenchen presented as a continuation of the presentations, this is her third now, on the two areas that the task force is asked to look at and make recommendations on. And those are the strategies that can be utilized by communities to increase recruitment, retention, and promotion of both minority police officers and female police officers. And I know we looked at the training component this time, and I know Chief Mello was a part of that conversation. He may want to discuss some of that, but one of the things that came out of that was the potential for dialogue on those issues with local law enforcement and members of the community to see if those recommendations that come from, you know, the evidence and what's presented nationally makes sense locally, and if we can add to that. So those are two areas that we're focusing on right now.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. And Mr. Ken Burrow, will you be speaking for the logistics team?
Great. On behalf of Representative Hall, who is unable to be here today due to his school commitments, the logistics subcommittee met in the middle of May. I think we've met maybe twice since our last meeting, and we are well underway in conversations about primary and secondary traffic stop laws. And so we spent most of the last meeting reviewing a proposal by the Racial Profiling Advisory Board, and members of the subcommittee have met separately at the request of the chair to try and drill down further on that proposal. We are meeting again, I believe, in 2 weeks to further flush that proposal out, so that we can share, hopefully at our July full task force meeting, a recommendation to this group. And that would largely take care of two of our legislative requirements, that we review the merits and feasibility of a primary and secondary traffic law system, and what that could potentially look like. So as you could understand, the traffic code is quite comprehensive. And so it will take several meetings to finish wading through that. We have a number of other tasks that we're trying to complete as well. There's an internal affairs working group that presented a proposal to you that was passed at the last meeting to require both pre-service and in-service training for individuals brought on to be a part of an internal affairs group. They're also working on another recommendation that involves the patterns and practice authority of the Attorney General's office. I know they asked a series of questions to the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities, received those responses, and we'll be looking to go through them. I also know that the bill that expands the civil rights authority of the Attorney General's office did pass the legislature, both the House and the Senate, and I believe was or will be signed by the governor. So, you know, I don't know how much more work the internal affairs group will need to do in light of that, but they'll assess that and make a full recommendation and assessment to the subcommittee at the June meeting. And the next, that's one issue we're trying to finish up. Primary and secondary traffic law system. We hope to have a full recommendation to the group on in the coming months. And the other statutory issue that we are required to look at, it was outlined in the police accountability bill that I know Renee has done a lot of work on. We just haven't started to discuss it as a subcommittee, and likely we'll start to discuss it probably not until July. We'll get through the primary, secondary traffic stop data issue, and then we'll work on. But one of the questions asked in the police accountability bill for this group to look at was how professional bondsmen, I believe, take into custody individuals who have failed to appear in a court or have a rearrest warrant out for them. So that's something that our committee is required to look at and report back on by the end of the year. The full task force, the logistics subcommittee will take that on, and hopefully by the end of the summer have recommendations for this group on that, so that we can comply with that provision of the statute. So those are the areas that we're working on and will likely carry us through the next few months. And I'm sure that other things will come up along the way as well. And so there are a few other members. I know the chair isn't here, but if I'm missing anything, Renee, Shafiq, John, Chief Wright, feel free to chime in. But if not, that's the update from logistics.
Thank you, Ken. Ken, did I forget to have you introduce yourself?
That's fine.
I
Folks
did
know
not
who I
induce
am.
you to do that.
That's
Would you
okay.
like to do that now?
I'm okay. Ken Barone, CCSU. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just thinking of where everybody sets up in my squares, and I'm like, I think I skipped Ken. My apologies. So moving on to other business, we're looking at the timeline for conclusions to subcommittees to work for next steps. But before we move there, I just wanted to say where we've been together for quite some time now, almost we've been together for a little while now, like going into another year, and we're coming to a close in December. And one of the things that I've been questioned about, like just from community members and people that who are very close to different criminal justice reform issues, is that as a task force, I know that we had some requirements that we had to fulfill, but I noticed that we haven't done much conversation, or we haven't talked enough or a lot about, I won't say enough, but a lot about the the use of force. And I'd like us to get back to that conversation before our time is up. This is a conversation that's going on across the country, and I hate for us to be a task force that talks about transparency and accountability, and that we glaze over the fact that we didn't even approach the issue of use of force. I'm open to anyone wanting to comment on the direction that we go in the last few months. We can have that conversation now if you'd like.
Yeah, I like that. If I could, I like to respond on that. The use of force and traffic laws are truly two of my most passionate areas of reform regarding this. Out of all of my experience in the field and all of the research I've done in all my writings, motor vehicle stops seem to be the single most flashpoint around racial instability in our country when it comes between police engaging Black and brown people. It goes all the way back to the Watts riots. The Watts riots started over a motor vehicle stop. So, we can just see how this has not changed over decades. In addition to that, the use of force continues to be the exact point that continues to really bring our country on the brink of social unrest. And I really would like to see us, I guess you would say, get out of our comfort zone when it comes to this use of force issue in Connecticut. And I will say, having been a former law enforcement officer and only been out for about 4 years and still engage with a lot of different law enforcement entities, including my son, now becoming a member of New Haven Police Department, wearing some of my old uniforms to work. You know, my heart is in law enforcement on both sides. However, we have to move, I guess, our comfort zone to a place where we recognize that it's going to take some bold movements to get us in a better place. And I am not suggesting or alluding or even declaring that law enforcement in the state of Connecticut is operating below a threshold or operating in an inappropriate way. What I'm moving to is what I've said before. If I am driving from New Haven to Hartford to Enfield, and I happen to get stopped by the police, or I stop off at a restaurant, or I'm visiting somebody even in Manchester, when I'm approached by an officer, I should have the same expectation of engagement around my normal behavior that I would have with an officer in another place, meaning that if I get stopped in Manchester, I should not have a police officer tapping on my window, let's just say with a taser or in a very aggressive way. Whereas maybe in New Haven, they just walk up and say, hey, what's up, buddy? Can I see your license registration? So we need to create a standard. I've been saying this, now I'm gonna say it probably until I die. We need a standard use of force policy in the state of Connecticut, that every single police department is following the exact sequence of protocols. And for my colleagues that's on the line, on the Zoom, the best way that would be understood is that we would have a general order that maybe not the state doesn't legislate, but it's a general order framework that every single department has that same exact general order when it comes to use of the firearm, use of their taser, pepper spray, use of a baton or some other type of weapon. How do they go about handling things like self-defense and high-risk motor vehicle stops, and what is determined to be a high-risk motor vehicle stop? So I'm hoping that we can, you know, as Chairman, as you said, I hope that we start really drilling into this, because I think these two issues, use of force and motor vehicle stops, will be, if we can attack those, they will become the true essence of how we give ourselves, I guess you would say, some extended life in building relationships between police and Black and brown people.
Thank you, Shafiq. Me not being a law enforcement officer, I would ask that the other law enforcement experts that are on the call, what Mr. Shafiq just described, is that an unrealistic expectation?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Chief Mello.
So as I reported to this task force last year, in June 6th of last year, prior to the Police Accountability Bill, the Post Council voted to establish a subcommittee to do just what Shafiq is referring to, and that was to create a statewide mandated policy that all police departments would be required to adhere to. As part of that effort, we enlisted the services of folks in the legal community, scholars. I'll just give you a few names. Professor Tracy Mears from Yale, from Justice Collaboratory, who is a national figure on use of force and sat on the President Obama's 21st Century Task Force on policing. She was a member of that. Dr. Amy Donahue from UConn was a member of that. Dr. James McCabe from Sacred Heart was a member of that. And so there were a number of distinguished men and women that were on that committee. And we began our work well before the Police Accountability Bill was written, or I shouldn't say well before the Police Accountability Bill was written. And the charge was to look at what, for lack of a better term, best practices throughout the country, to see what the rest of the country was doing, and also to look at what we felt was best for Connecticut. We focused on those agencies that had recent federal oversight and were under consent decrees, because there has been a lot of analysis and thought that's gone into those programs and those policies. And so we looked at a number of those agencies. That work took about 6 months. And that final product, which reflects not just the things I just referred to, but the recently passed standards as part of the Police Accountability Bill, Section 29, the use of force. That work was completed in November. The Post Council approved that policy in December under the authority that can be mandated to every single police department. But that was phase one. And the program, the project consisted of 2 phases. And the second phase being to develop a training program that all police departments would be required to adhere to, and standards for use of force instructors. That began in January, and it's still ongoing, and we expect to have that completed by the end of this month or beginning of next month. And to do that, we took not only the use of force policy that we had, the post policy, but also the Police Accountability Bill and some of the recent changes to the Police Accountability Bill. There were 3 or 4 language tweaks to it. We enlisted the services of police use of force instructors, both private and certainly public, from around the state, and meet several times a week, both in committee and the subcommittee level, to write a training program. That training program, again, should be completed soon. We expect to hold a special meeting this summer of the Post Council to approve that program. Once those 2 items are completed, then the Post Academy will conduct a training session for all use of force instructors, a trainer type process. And those trainers, once they complete that course, will reapply to be use of force instructors throughout the state. And they will go back to their departments and train their departments on the new policy, which again incorporates the Police Accountability Bill and under the new training program. The program cannot be modified. It can be enhanced, and we encourage local agencies to enhance that as they see fit. I'm not aware of right now and of any other state that has a mandated policy and training program. There are, most of those training programs and policies are centered upon larger cities, but Connecticut will be amongst the leaders in the country to have a single training program where everyone will be operating off the same sheet of music as a minimum. And so when we look at the use of force statute based upon the Police Accountability Bill, and we compare and contrast it to the 50 states, you'll see that Connecticut is among, and maybe even has the most restrictive and legislation in the country. The policy, I believe, is much better than the legislation because it goes further and it provides far greater specificity. And the training program, because the policy is great and the law is great, but you need a training program that really drives that point home. And so I think that Connecticut is the leader in the country when it comes to that. Again, we've talked about this before, and I'm glad that you brought that up today. Thank you.
Can I add to Chief Mello's comments? One of the things that we'd largely been lacking in the state is uniform collection of use of force incident data. Departments largely collected use of force incidents based on their own internal mechanisms. Many departments use the state model form, but they weren't required to use the state model form. And many departments modified the state model form, and it was missing some standard information. And so it's really hard to have a thoughtful conversation about how force is applied, that where the foundation is based on data, and instead it's often based on sort of anecdotal evidence, which tells us something, but doesn't tell us everything we need to know. And so about a year ago, we worked with the Post Council and CJIS, the Criminal Justice Information System, to totally revamp the state of Connecticut's use of force reporting form. The Post Council formally adopted that new form, thanks to Chief Mello's leadership last month. The form is currently getting ready to enter the pilot phase, so departments will start over the course of the summer piloting the form to make sure it works. And by 2022, every department in the state will be required to use this new reporting form to report use of force incidents to the state. And we largely relied on the state of New Jersey to help us develop that form. So believe it or not, in my opinion, the state of New Jersey has probably done one of the more comprehensive jobs in requiring the collection of uniform use of force data. And it's all run by the Attorney General's office in New Jersey. They have a different system there. The AG is the top law enforcement officer in the state. And so they have the authority to mandate certain things be done. And the problem with the way we currently collect use of force information in Connecticut is we might know that Officer A used a pressure point, had a hand or fist strike, and maybe used a taser, but we don't really know from that form how the situation escalated, what the subject's response was to that type of force. As an example, was video footage available? Lots of information that we were missing, and the new form will address all of that. It not only will capture additional pertinent information that we should just know, but it will also capture information on the escalation of force and the subject's response to force. So the form will be able to tell us that the officer used verbal commands and that the subject threw a glass bottle at the officer, as an example. And then the officer removed their taser and threatened to use the taser, and the subject did X, right? And it will help us better to understand the context and the complexity of use of force situations, and to build an analytical matrix that I think will be able to answer lots of questions that people put out there. And so it's taken a long time to do this thoughtfully. We do have use of force information for 2019 and 2020, but again, it's not uniformly being reported. And so all of that is being fixed with this new reporting system and this new reporting form. The data will be available to the public. So CJIS will put the data into a useful database, and then the public will be able to use that data. And the other significant change, and this might seem sort of bureaucratic, but it's a big change here in the state of Connecticut, is that every officer will be required to fill out their own use of force form. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, of course, right? Every officer should be reporting on their use of force. It varies from department to department. In a number of departments across the state of Connecticut today, use of force incidents are reported by incident, which means there's one report per incident. And it's sort of challenging to figure out which officer used which force at which time and in which order, and how the subject responded to that force. And so we're moving to a much cleaner system, and a system that I think we'll be able to get much more information out of. So will that solve our use of force problem? No, but it will certainly help to shed light on the degree to which force is used here in the state of Connecticut, by whom, under what circumstances. We'll be able to see differences across agencies. We'll be able to see differences across the way police interact with subjects. And I think by 2023, this form will be fully implemented in January. By 2023, we will, for the first time in the state of Connecticut, have the clearest picture yet on the application of force by a law enforcement in the state. So just to put that out there publicly, people should just know that that's happening. It's been happening under the radar, but it is no small change to the way business is done here in Connecticut.
Yeah, and I just like to add, if I could, too. Thank you, Ken, for bringing that up, and also for Chief Mello for the work that you've done. I see you stepped down. Is that you stepped down and giving up the mantle there?
Are you talking about the Police Chiefs Association?
Yes.
I'm still involved with Post, but not with the CPCA.
Okay, so we'll miss you there. But the other thing too is, Ken, I don't know if you're aware of, some departments, the officer that's actually involved in the use of force or use of deadly force, they themselves do not even have to write or be the writer of the report. Another person, another sworn officer can actually write that report for them. So I don't know if people are aware of that. I could get in a shooting and the sergeant could actually write that report for me, or I could get in a shooting and the lieutenant could write that report depending on the department. So this standardization around how force is used and how force is captured, I cannot stress it enough. It's a major issue. And I don't stand here to try to unlock special behind the blue line codes, but this is just about, we are where we are in America. It's 240 something years old. I mean, I probably won't be here certainly in 100 years, but I'd like to see the country be in a much better place than it is now. And I certainly don't want my 1-year-old granddaughter telling her son, be patient, we'll get there soon. That's, at some point, this thing's got to end. So, I think that, Ken, as you think about that use of force form, we need to also think about a policy that circles around that requires the officer to be the scribe of the incident. Now, I know for like New Haven, when I was in the union, we did negotiate time to give the officer time based on the different data that comes back from trauma and what you remember, so that the officer is not under the gun per se to have to write that report right then and there. When I got in my shooting, because of the politics of the department, I was in the department literally on a 16-hour shift, sitting in ISU, writing a deadly force report, having had the incident happen at 12 o'clock after already working 12 hours, and I didn't even get off work till that day until I was done till 10 hours. So every department is totally different on how they're handling that. So again, adding additional language around that, which what would be the time frame for the officer, should they're in good physical health and good mind state, what would be the time frame that they would have to produce that document? Because that document that they produce would be part of what's used to determine to the Attorney General's office or the state's attorney the information or the evidence that they would need to make a determination whether or not the shooting was good or not good. All right, thank you.
Any other comments? I struggle with I understand the form and I understand the policy. I'm looking for the deterrent. What deters somebody from using force? What deters somebody from using it? Because the form, which is great, and the data is great, but what deters an officer from assaulting somebody on the side of the road and choking them? What makes them say, you know what, this might not be my best, there's gonna be consequences for that? What deters that? And I asked that because it's interesting. As I was walking in the office today, I was talking to a young man, African-American man, who said he was walking to school. He takes classes in the same building my office is in, and he was stopped by an officer. And the officer said, "You fit the description." He said, "Of what?" And he did not give him any more information, and he detained him for 40 minutes. And the gentleman was late for class. And I'm just trying to figure out, we still have officers who are in communities of color detaining people, stopping them, abusing them, assaulting them with very little consequences. And I'm curious too, as a task force, we've been tasked with certain, with certain charges, but we also had that third charge where we can look at anything that's deemed necessary. And we've already seen the state of this country, and Connecticut is no different. How are we not looking at use of force and finding ways to deter, especially with leadership here on this call? This is leadership. And it might not be happening in your city per se or under your leadership, but it is happening in the town next to it. It is happening in our state. So how do we, who call ourselves this task force, I know some people think it's just a kind of a smoke and mirrors thing, it's cute to show up. But for me, I could walk out of this building today, get pulled over and dragged out of my car, tased, and possibly even shot. So how do we prevent that? I don't know if we can prevent it, but how do we at least put something in place that makes this a little bit more difficult for people to do that? If I'm phrasing it right. Chief Mello?
I'm sorry, if I could respond to that. I think we do have those things in place, and I think that's what we're talking about. What prevents anyone from going out and doing something wrong? Your ethics, the law, and the penalty. And so Connecticut, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, has gone to great length to create what is likely the most restrictive law in the state regarding use of force by law enforcement. Connecticut has gone through great lengths to develop a policy and a training program that provides guidelines and provides standards and provides training. The penalty is if you violate that law, that very restrictive law, that you can be criminally charged and punished. The penalty is that if you violate that policy, you can be fired and you can be decertified. What goes hand in hand, which is also part of the Police Accountability Bill, and I will say, which was also introduced by Post prior to the Police Accountability Bill, and that is the decertification piece. It specifically states in there, now this wasn't necessarily in the bill, but the Post Council voted to include excessive, unreasonable, or illegal force. If you're found to have committed excessive, unreasonable, or illegal force, or force that's likely to cause serious physical injury or death, or you fail to report or intervene in such force, that you can be decertified. So there are a number of different mechanisms in place. The courts, the discipline within the agency, because now we have an internal standard as well as the legal standard. And then third, you also have your license, your certification to be a police officer that is also at risk. So I think that we've looked at it under that lens and said, how can we hold police officers accountable if they don't adhere to the law, the policy, and this training program? And that's why I was describing how vital this training program is and how vital the message is. In fact, when I had referenced we have a number of use of force instructors. We are only going to recertify use of force instructors that we believe understand and can do a good job of teaching this policy and the foundation of this policy.
Thank you, Chief Mello. One of the things that I want to, do we have data? Is there data, or is there a place that we can go to find out how many police officers that have been removed from service due to use of force, and how often? Is there data out there? Because I'm looking at the national data, and out of all the police shootings and all the things that have happened nationally, only 5% of the police officers have been prosecuted. So is Connecticut following that trend? Because we need to, that's something that we need to look at.
I mean, there are 89 incidents that the Chief State's Attorney or the Division of Criminal Justice's office has been responsible for investigating dating back to 2001 here in the state of Connecticut. Prior to 2015, they were only legally required to investigate when police officers used deadly force and death occurred. Starting in 2019, I believe the standard changed to when they used any physical force the point is they've changed the standard. I don't have it in front of me. They've changed the standard a bit. But of those 89 or so incidents where deadly force was used and death occurred in, I think, all but 6 cases to date from 2001 to 2020, those reports are all publicly available on the Chief State's Attorney's website. They're usually very long and very comprehensive reports that have been published by the state's attorney who is responsible for that investigation. So we have a system in Connecticut for investigating deadly use of force incidents, and those reports are required to be made available to the public. And the Division of Criminal Justice has done a good job of at least going back to 2001 here in the state of Connecticut. I believe of those 89 cases, 3 or 4, don't quote me, have led to criminal charges here in the state of Connecticut. They're complicated cases. We are, as part of our work with the Connecticut Bar Association, we have been building a database of information from those 89 incidents so that people don't have to wade through the really complicated and detailed reports, but they can pull more information more easily out of that data set. How many incidents, what departments were involved, what was the outcome, were there charges filed, were there disciplinary action against officers? So all of that is currently available to the public in those reports. We're in the process of trying to make that more consumable by the public so that that information is more available. So that paired with the new use of force data collection system that will go in, that is in place, that's being changed, right? So we're moving towards a more robust data collection system so that we can all be talking the same language in the future, right? I'll give you an example for TASER data. We started collecting incidents when a TASER was used back in 2015. Knowing nothing about tasers and how often they were used, I don't know, the first year we did it, I assumed there'd probably be 3,000-4,000 cases. I mean, right? I have no clue how often tasers are used. Tasers are used on average about 400 times a year in the state of Connecticut. Now, for some, that's a lot. For some, that's not a lot. But we now at least have 5 years of data that tells us how often tasers are used, by who, on whom, under what circumstances. That system will be in place for use of force. And we've historically always had lots of data on officer-involved shootings here in the state of Connecticut. So just trying to make that data more available to the public.
Just one thing, I know Shafiq had something really quickly, and I don't want the meeting to drag out, but I feel like this is important, especially for people that are watching on CTN. The question that you said, how many people were prosecuted, Ken?
Again, please don't quote me. I'd have to go back and look. I know that of the 89 cases, there was a case in 2005 where an officer was from Hartford, was prosecuted, found guilty, and was overturned on appeal. And then more recently, there were officers charged, I believe, in the Hamden case in 2019. I believe there was a corrections officer that was charged. It was a New Haven correctional issue, I think, also in 2019. Those are the 3 that are coming to mind. I'd have to go and look more closely to see if there might be another 1 or 2. But less than 5, I think, is probably an accurate assessment.
Less than 5. So is that this policy that you talk about, Chief Mello, that you mentioned, is that the deterrent? Is this new? Because that's only 5 people.
Well, Mr. Chairman, then
Less than 5.
let me address that. First of all, the law will take effect. It hasn't taken effect yet, the new law. It'll take effect January 1st. And the post-decertification policy took place, was enacted last year by the council. So prior to that, you couldn't be decertified. But please, let's speak, honestly here. Any death, any serious injury is tragic and unfortunate, and should at all costs try to be avoided. But I don't think it's fair, in my view. I think it's misleading to say if there were X amount of use of force and only X amount were prosecuted, something's wrong. Given the assumption, especially to those watching, that those others were all illegal and somebody should have been arrested. Let's remember that the process that it goes through both locally and then goes through a judicial review by a prosecutor or prosecutors, or possibly by a judge if there was a warrant application. There are, and that is when all the emotion is stripped away and they look at the facts and circumstances and they apply the law. And so I don't think it's fair to assume that every one of those, that percentage, it gives the impression that there were cases that should have been prosecuted and weren't. And that's something that we would have to assume that the prosecutors and the judges weren't doing their jobs. And you can assume that if you'd like, but you can also assume that, as unfortunate as it is, that sometimes, and as ugly as it always is, that use of force in a violent society is sometimes necessary. I'd also like to point out that there are various degrees when we're talking about force. There are areas of use of force that are often identified by the agency. And those are not cases where there would be a prosecution. In fact, many times those cases are reviewed by a prosecutor just to make sure that there isn't a violation, but it may be. And some agencies do a much better job of this than others. And that is to look at all use of force cases and decide, I think that was overly aggressive. I think there was a better way to handle that. So we are going to retrain you and discipline you. And so not every officer that is involved in a force that could have been, and we believe possibly should have been handled differently, or the de-escalation should have gone on, that there could have been a better effort in de-escalation. Not all those cases are violations of the law and are handled internally. And so when we're talking about use of force, Ken's talking about cases where there was serious physical injury or death. When we talk about use of force, we're looking at all use of force cases, not just those cases where there may have been a serious physical injury or death, but how do we prevent all those cases? How do we better train officers? How do we prepare officers to make better decisions so they're not acting in an aggressive way? And those are things that normally are discovered internally when we look through our body cams or we read reports, when we contact those who have been victims of force. So those are just two important points that I wanted to make.
I appreciate your points, Chief Mellon. You definitely said, let's speak honestly. Speaking honestly, when I was 17 years old, I was walking through a parking lot in Stamford, Connecticut, Bloomingdale's. I was going to my mom's job after school. A police officer was sitting in his cruiser in the back of the parking lot. He pulled up to me and asked me where I was going. I said, I'm going to my mom's job. He said, why don't you stop for a second? I said, I'm going to my mom's job. He parked his cruiser, got out of his cruiser, slammed me on the car, and put his knee in my back. And he ran through my backpack. After he did that, he sent me on my way. That was use of force. I wasn't breaking the law. I was walking through a parking lot, right? I don't think that was recorded. Based off of what Ken reported recently, just now, the tasing incident that I brought up numerous times, that happened to me, not that I heard about, that happened to me, wouldn't even be recorded. The officer is now a sergeant. So if we're speaking realistically, there are numerous incidents, and I'm sure, that there are incidents that happen in this state to people of color, just like the young man who got stopped today, that go unreported. There's no deterrent. So my question is, how are we not looking at that? There's a thing called silence is compliance. If we're not looking at it or saying something about it, or saying that we know that the criminal justice system has some serious systemic race issues, If we're not talking about that, then what are we actually doing here? We all have other things to do. We all have other things to do. I don't want to waste anybody's time. But I came here because I believed in this process. And I saw an opportunity to work with leadership together as a community member and as an impacted community member to make change, or at least to make recommendations that look forward to change. And I'm just saying, if we're not talking about that honestly, then what are we doing? Mr. Clark, did you have a comment? Mr. Sedgwick, I got you next.
Yes, sorry, just in terms of the what we've been looking at in public awareness, and I know the presentations by Dr. Kringen have been helpful for everyone. To address your point and the charges, two of the charges of the task force looking at diversity of both along race and ethnicity and gender, you know, that what we've been shown is the evidence clearly states that diversity equals less force. So, for instance, recent studies showing Black and Hispanic officers use less force than white officers. They make fewer stops and fewer arrests than white officers, and which reflects a greater reliance on community interaction and problem solving. And on the other side of that, the gender diversification studies showing that female officers use less force than male officers, use less coercion, and receive fewer complaints and engage in less misconduct. So, I mean, I know that in terms of the public awareness subcommittee, these are things that we're looking at in terms of fact finding and also making recommendations to the degree that that makes sense in Connecticut, and to the members of that subcommittee to send forth to the greater task force. And also, I guess on the disability side in our subcommittee there, we've also looked at members of the disability community being more ingrained in the work of policing and training and otherwise. And we sent forth a recommendation on that became now state law. And I know Post has been helping in terms of assisting with that recommendation and ensuring that someone from the disability community is part of a standard training for those that are receiving training within policing on these issues. So just wanted to bring that to light in terms of what's going on in some of the subcommittees to address those issues.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. John?
Thank you, Chairman. I think Andrew started touching on what I was going to say. First off, Daryl, I don't think anybody would disagree that there's certainly systemic, racism in our society. So I don't want to minimize that at all. Chief Mello did a good job of explaining, I think, the process, what's going on currently. But if I look at it beforehand, these chiefs have a very difficult job in the hiring, and Andrew touched on this. And I think that is, I look at that as being the first part of it, making sure the research, the background, the thought process on who they hire, ensuring that these new officers, people wearing a badge now, have the emotional intelligence, the maturity, the ability to converse with members of the community. So, your initial question is, how does that change moving forward? A lot of it, I believe, is in the hiring and ensuring that the people wearing a uniform, again, have that emotional intelligence, have that maturity to do the job. And I would assume, and I want to speak for them, but I would assume that the chiefs will tell you that is one of their hardest part of their job, and just how much thought and background and ensuring they get the best candidates. So, I look at it, again, Chief Mello did a great job explaining currently, but I look at it as the bigger picture. And I think you look at the standards, and maybe the chiefs can talk about it, but I'm sure that's a very difficult decision they have every time they hire a new officer, and making sure that that officer has the ability to do the things I spoke about, and mainly be able to converse with the community. So again, how does it change going forward? I always say it's the recruitment, the retention, the promotion, but certainly the recruitment of officers getting into the field. And hopefully what happened to you when you were 17 years old, things like that don't happen, because we have a better officer, and Andrew alluded to it, with diversifying our police departments, race, by gender, by definitely having a more diverse group of officers serving the public. So I just wanted to touch on that, back to your initial question on what is one way we change this moving forward. And I think it's currently being done. We have high standards here. I'm certain the chiefs on this task force do a great job, and who they hire in their departments. And I'm sure that's an issue for every department, every chief. And they put a lot of, again, time and energy in making a very difficult decision, because that's a huge decision for any department anytime you hire a new officer.
I appreciate that, John. I wanted to add to that, and I appreciate you saying that. What I wanted to say is that why aren't we using this as a platform to support the chiefs in making recommendations to make that hiring process easier, or what have you? Or one of the things I remember being an issue is the termination and letting people go, letting bad officers go that end up returning due to union issues or something like that, where we're making recommendations toward legislators or whoever. Why aren't we using that platform to make that process? My problem is that these problems still exist, and we need to be addressing them. And I don't like to bring up, I like to use lived experience. In other hats that I wear, I'm a subject matter expert, so using lived experience is part of the gig sometimes. And unfortunately, I've had some negative interactions with police officers. I've had many positive interactions. One the other day with a state trooper who swerved in front of me as I was on my three-wheeler, and I was like, what the heck is he doing? What's he doing? And you know what he was doing? He was blocking me from passing him because a deer ran out in front of both of us. So actually, he saved his life and mine. And I was in a slingshot, so I probably would have been a lot more messed up than him. And he said on his loudspeaker, that's why I was swerving. You know what I mean? He was doing his job, so, I mean, I couldn't be mad at that guy because, he helped me out. So I say that to say that, not all my interactions have all been negative. Many of them have been positive. Even on this task force, I felt like I've bridged some friendships, some days better than others, right? But the point is that at the end of the day, we still have, policies and procedures don't stop people from getting hurt. And, I was hoping that we would be able to, through this great wealth of leadership, come up with ways that people don't get hurt.
Mr. Chair, can I just add one thing before we
Sure,
wrap up? Thanks. I'm just going to maybe leave folks with a story, because I think maybe it helps to illustrate, when you're in the thick of it, how you're making more progress than you realize. Back in 2012 and 2013, we were working on reforms to the racial profiling law. What we were asking for at the time was that police officers collect all this information on a traffic stop at the side of the road. Seems pretty small today. I don't think there's anybody that's opposed to having that data collected and analyzing it. And at the time, there was a lot of pushback from law enforcement saying, cops will be on the side of the road for a long time, and that'll be dangerous to them. And if you make us do this, we'll stop stopping cars, and that'll make the roads less safe, right? There's a lot of rhetoric around the implementation of this program. And, in my experience, what I found was that it didn't take very long for the policing profession and the culture within policing to adapt. It didn't happen overnight, but the system changed. And we have to remember, so today, I don't think police think twice about collecting information after a traffic stop. It's just ingrained in what they do. The new policies that came out in the wake of the East Haven incident that ended up being pushed out across the state took some time to get pushed out, but today they're ingrained in what police do. We have to remember we're talking over 100 police departments in this small state of Connecticut. We're a very parochial state, so it's not like there's one head police officer and they can flip a switch and everybody responds. And each agency has their own culture. And we're also talking about close to 9,000 police officers in the state. And so we're talking about turning a fairly large tanker, and it's not going to happen overnight. And all of the things that Chief Mello and others have put on the table that might seem small, I can guarantee you that they're all going to add up to a reduction in use of force, in increased numbers of decertifying officers that previously weren't able to be decertified, right? A system with a new inspector general coming online that'll provide a new level of accountability and transparency in deadly use of force incidents. So it might feel like as we're meeting, we're not maybe getting to the point where, you know, we found the golden key. But my experience over the last 10 plus years in this work is that there's no one answer, that all these things that feel small add up, and that you've just got to keep plugging away. We've got to give it time. I know that is not always a popular position, particularly for those members in the community that feel like they're the ones whose lives are harmed on a regular basis, and you're telling me I need time. But government systems don't move quickly, particularly when you're talking over 100 agencies with 100 different cultures and 9,000 officers, and a system of a judicial system that is just as large, needing to adapt to these new policies and procedures. But I promise you, we are headed in the right direction in terms of hiring and promotion. We still have a lot of work as a task force to do there. We're working on that. But I think it's important that we take stock in, we've done a lot, believe it or not, over the last year, and it might not feel like a lot, but if you put it all together, we are a much different state today, and all the seeds that we've planted over the past year haven't come to full fruition yet. But you'll look back 5 years from now and go, oh, wow, you know, I know that X had an impact. And the way I know this stuff takes time is because we're almost 10 years into the racial profiling work. And we've only in the last 2 years started to see significant reductions in racial disparities in traffic enforcement across the state. It takes that long for these programs to take off and to work. And so I guess I just leave folks with my perspective, which is that we've done an awful lot within the system. There's still a lot more to do, but we also need to be really patient.
Appreciate that, Ken. As a parent, as a Black parent, if you came to my door with that, and after my son had been injured by a police officer, I would have some choice words for you. And so when we think about family members who would respond, that would be their response. And for the young man that was crying this afternoon in the office because he was no criminal record and was stopped and detained for 40 minutes because of his size and color, he fit a description that still no one knows about. I don't think that he cares about how far we've come. So I think that some people would disagree. I just want to put that out there. I want to, I appreciate everybody's input, and I think it's valued. And sometimes we have to have the difficult conversation in order to move the needle. Hopefully it didn't fall on deaf ears. We encourage you to, I had a video sent to you where Channel 2, CBS News, did an excellent report on policing and showed many different sides of policing, positive policing and different things. So I encourage us to come back. Anybody feel free to reach out to me after this meeting. If you felt like you didn't want to say something in open dialogue, or you feel like you want to talk about something or issues, or you want to bring it back to the next task force meeting, I encourage you to do so. But I encourage you to watch the video. And I see there's a lot of positive policing and How do we do that? How do we engage that? How do we get this better? How do we get the communities to start trusting police officers again? How do we get to that? You know, I know we only have a limited amount of time, and then at the end of the day, it's all over. But for me, it won't be over because I'll still be a Black person in this community, you know, dealing with the day-to-day ins and outs of being who I am. And, you know, it's supposed to be a great time when your kid reaches an age where they can drive. But for Black and brown people, when your kid gets to an age that they can drive, it becomes more scary than an exciting time, right? We don't celebrate it. We're like, listen, now you got to worry about even more things than him just walking outside. So those are my final thoughts.
Yeah, and I just, first of all, I just want to commend everybody for the work that they're doing. I've been doing this thing, it seems like a lifetime, and I really appreciate all of you for your time and your sacrifice. And I met some new people I didn't even know I was related to, like John. Seems like we're constantly in each other's brain. But you know, I'm gonna just make this statement and close. I have 3 sons and a daughter, but my 2 particular sons, one is 20 and he's about to be 21. His girlfriend is white. They live in an affluent neighborhood in Connecticut, and he lives with her and her parents. And I have another son who's 25 who just became a police officer that lives 2 blocks from me, him and his wife. And my granddaughter, who you just saw photobomb my Zoom. My current anxiety every single day, every single night, is that I will get a phone call that that the police have shot and killed my 20-year-old son, who has a white girlfriend, or my son has gotten shot and killed on the job, or even worse, that he has to shoot and kill somebody. So this is where, that's my compass for doing this work. When I started doing this work 20 years ago, neither one of these boys was old enough to have a girlfriend or a job. But I knew doing that work then that I have to do things that's going to have a long lasting impact, because maybe somebody else had children in that similar circumstance. So I just offer that up as you know, as a feedback or a baseline to say, this work that we're doing now will have far-reaching impacts in the years to come. And I appreciate all of you for doing it, because you don't have to do it. You know, we know that it's very easy to kind of retreat behind the line and let it be what it is. But you know, whatever you can give, it's kind of like Save the Children, whatever you can give, you know, 25 minutes a day, 2 hours a day, your best brain. I think it's going to be truly this collective spirit and this expertise that we do the work we do. And then let's follow up behind it to make sure it's being done. And I will say, in our personal spaces, let's challenge our colleagues. Let's challenge our family members. Let's challenge our professional friends and have them move the needle to higher heights. Because a lot of this real work, I think, that you're looking for, Chairman, it's not going to be in a policy. It's going to be in those personal conversations that we're having on the golf course and in the bar and at, you know, wherever, at a conference, at our homes, on a run. But I think that we all have to be change leaders on this call. I think we are change leaders on this call. And I think if we just continue to hold that flag, you know, it's like soldier story, who will carry this flag? If I fall, who will carry that flag? So if we are all flag carriers, if we fall, who are we charging or encouraging to carry this mission, you know, into, you know, like a better Connecticut, a better America? That's what we need. All right. Thank you. God bless. I appreciate y'all. Let me share that with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other comments before we move to the next meeting date? This has been a robust meeting, and I also echo thank you all for the work that you do and your input and your leadership and what you do, the things that you do right. And you know, I know there's some great leaders on the call, and this is why, you know, and I'm very passionate about this topic. So I really appreciate all the work that everybody does on this call, and I admire you all. With that being said, on Tuesday, July 13th, will be our next meeting. Mark your calendars, 2021 at 1 o'clock. And is there a motion? Any other?
Can I just add, Mr. Chair, that we're looking to keep the meetings in August, so the corresponding, which would be, I believe that's the third Tuesday. And then in terms of the public awareness subcommittee, we have a meeting coming up on June 29th, and the disability subcommittee on July 13th as well. That would be at 11 a.m. and August 17th too. And all of these so far, I think we're conceiving them to continue virtually, but I think maybe we'll talk with the chair and members about at some point getting together in person, because I think some of the issues probably that you're addressing, Mr. Chair, also have to do with getting in person and really getting a sense of being together again, as opposed to being virtually. So,
Absolutely. And I wanted to just mention Ken and John, we will be meeting with the subcommittee chairs. An email will be coming out for that meeting as well. And within the next couple of days or so, the subcommittee chairs will be meeting. And once again, I thank you all for all the work that you do in coming to this meeting. Is there a motion to close?
Make a motion to close.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time. See you next month.